comes to the King's Speech.
Thank you, Academy. This is a boyhood ambition come true tonight.
Why should I waste my time listening?
Because I have a voice!
Yes, you do.
My dear chap, I've had many letters of congratulations from the land of my birth, but none have been more welcome than yours.
We're talking about rape, molestation of small children. That's not the kind of crime we want to let go unaddressed. Those people need to go to jail.
Begin.
It's not about the answer, it's about the question.
What is the question?
We've got 74 minutes left to figure that out.
From the chevrons to the stripes to the traffic lights, the road's a landscape as a language.
Welcome everybody to Industry Day 2012. What a great way to start up off our evening with Gareth and Simon here from Bedlam. As you all know, they are the producers of the King's Speech, amongst other things that they've done in their fabulous lives. But I'm going to pass them straight over to you so you can talk about how you got to where you are today.
Actually, my career started, I worked in the city for 5 years, absolutely hated it, and then went travelling for a couple of years. Got a taste of working in TV when I was in Berkeley. Came back to the UK, but no one would give me a job. And I just found out that the local college to me, Ravensbourne, was considered the best in Europe at the time for television production. So I applied, and they turned me down. So I went back to work in the city and applied again, and got in the next year. And then literally day one, the first person I met was this man in a puffer jacket and a cagoule sort of cap turned back to front. And well, that was my journey to get into Ravensbourne. I'm not sure about yours.
My path to Ravensbourne. I had a fairly checkered sort of educational upbringing. Ended up sort of leaving school at 16 with not a lot of qualifications, and was working in sort of local shoe shop and other bits and pieces. And to cut a very long story short, ended up going to a college of further education down in Dorset, which Jeremy Barr, who I believe is still associated with the college, had been part of the team that had put together the syllabus. So once I'd gone through and done that, which was a BTEC National Diploma, there was an opportunity to apply to Ravensbourne, and I got in on the first time of asking. Never let him forget that. And the next stage in my educational life started when I walked through, not these doors, but it was when it was down at the other site in Chislehurst.
And I don't know if you guys are sort of familiar or seen any pictures of the other site, but at the time it was pretty cutting edge. I mean, it looks a little bit shonky now. We were quite I mean, the big plus for us is that we were at the advent of the digital revolution. You know, the cameras had changed, and so we literally went in there, and it was quite old, you know, BTU-matic, really unusual sort of like dinosaur pieces of kit that you'd look at now and you're just in absolute horror with. And we were lucky to be on that wave that was coming in. I think one of the things that struck Gareth and I the first time we came to this site was the quality of the work that people were doing. Very quickly, just you know, straight out the back. A lot of you guys have got edit suites on your laptops and your phones. Ours was just very, very antiquated. But it was the one thing that we did find with Ravensbourne is we went in there and we were encouraged to push the boundaries, to almost, if you learn, it'd be very sort of like structured course, but then also what do we want to do? And I think that was really sort of, it freed us up. And I mean, one of the things, I don't know if there's a clip in there, but I made a documentary about the Dalai Lama. We had a chance to go after Dharamsala, and so we just felt that we were really pushing the boundaries and that the skies was limit for us. And Gareth and I, literally from day one, really got on.
I think the big seduction of Ravensbourne, and I think that it still exists, is that it was genuinely perceived as a centre of excellence. And I know that those sort of terms in the educational community are thrown around very, very easily these days. But in '93, when Simon and I were here, it was literally the National Film School in Beaconsfield, Bournemouth down on the south coast, and Ravensbourne. And each of them had their own sort of specialisms and things that they were known for. And Ravensbourne was considered the gateway to the TV industry more so than film. At the time, and I'm not sure whether the strategic partnership still exists, but at the time it was the only college that was supported by the independent TV network. So each of the broadcasters on ITV had a commitment to both financial involvement with the college, but also access, opportunity. And it was known as the back door to the BBC. So I think, you know, it comes from a place where it had a great reputation, a reputation that still exists, and, you know, that is supported every year that passes by the quality of the outgoing students. We were actually here 12 months ago as part of one of these sort of presentation events and got to meet a student who now works for us permanently, you know, and as long as Ravensbourne continue to set that qualitative bar very, very high, I think it will produce people that go on and will have a successful career in the media industry.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I had, because I had a career before I came to college, and so I'd been earning money, not great money. I mean, everyone thinks that people in the city are earning fortunes, some are, but not all. But I knew that I couldn't fuck around. I was coming in as a mature student, 27 years old, and I knew that by the time I get out in my 30s, I needed to have a job. I needed to have sort of some level that I could enter the industry and sort of guarantee myself work for something that I really love, because I'd worked to just earn money, but this became a sort of a calling. It was one of those things that I think maybe a lot of you in the audience, it's not something you go, oh, actually, I think I'll try telly or film. Everyone seems to have a love from it. That's what I've always found. It's been a passion. I always wanted to be a director, but I didn't have the arrogance to say, that's all I'm going to be, because you can be very much it can take you a long time, and it's quite brutal once you actually get out. And if you do love the industry, or you do love the job that much, when people are saying no, they're saying no to you personally. And so what I decided to do is that I'd get a very sort of structured education in all aspects of TV production, so sound, lighting, whatever, so that at least I could get a job and then just start watching what's going on in the industry. But at the time, I think when we were both at Ravensbourne, we did have aspirations that we were going to walk out the door, set up a company, and we were going to really just go gangbusters. That just didn't happen, did it?
It took a few years to get there. I mean, I think the sort of at these events, quite often what we're asked is the, you know, the magic wand. How do I get a job in TV? And I'm sure when we come to the Q&A part of tonight, which we hope is soon, because me monologuing for half an hour isn't fun for anyone. But, you know, the sort of the way that you interact with the industry at large, how you present yourself, how you manage that interaction, you know, there's some comment that we can draw on that. In terms of the years sort of following Ravensbourne specifically with our own personal stories, I mean, Simon, as he said, built on a very sort of broad-ranging technical ability across the board that ultimately led you to directing.
That's right.
Factual as a director. My path was slightly different. I had an aspiration to focus on drama, and I wasn't sniffy about whether that was going to be drama for TV or whether it was going to be drama for theatrical and feature films. So I went the route of starting as a floor runner, from a floor runner moved to a third AD to second AD to first AD, and that's where most of my professional life outside of Bedlam was. For 13 years, I was a first AD on a lot of the sort of kitchen soap dramas that we produce in the UK, but started to build a feature film CV. And it was about, we did the sums when we were chatting to Joe, didn't we? We left in 95. We thought we were the mutt's nuts for 2 years. We realised that we needed to get proper jobs for about 4 years, and then got frustrated with everyone else we were working with. And so Bedlam as a concept came together in 2002.
Yeah. That's
John,
right.
you do the next bit.
Yeah. Well, what we'd actually done is, because I went to work in as I started off in current affairs, and I went from technical, I had my first breakthrough film, which was aired in 2000 as a director. I did a cutting edge called Looking for Ricky. And like Gareth was on opposite sides of the planet. We'd meet for a couple of weeks a year and that would be it, but still with these big aspirations. And then in 2002, we'd had enough sort of experience under our belt that we said, well, let's start doing some of our own product. And that started off, that could have been, you know, small commercials, installations. And so to do that, we set up a company, Bedlam. It was called, I can't remember what it was called before that. I had a sort of a trading name as a sort of an accountancy exercise. And we set up in 2002. But for those sort of 4 years, it was one of those things that we had to make our money elsewhere. You know, you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay your bills, you have all of those things that's going on, whilst trying to keep true to yourself. And it wasn't until Gareth and I were making a 6-part series for the BBC that we were actually in the same room for longer than a week. And although we were doing that project,
pretty much from the first time since college,
yeah,
that we'd actually been working for the same company in the same space.
And it was that sort of crucial moment that we said, you know what, we've had this company now. This was 2006. We've had it for 4 years. We've never really done what we wanted to do with it. Let's give it 2 more years. If it doesn't work, then we'll shake hands, be friends, and go our separate ways, because it's running a business is, however small, is still a bit of a headache. But at the same time, one of the things that had happened, because when Gareth and I both started, when we both left, we both wanted to direct. And that's, as a small company, that means that you're competing for the same jobs that's coming through the door, if any are coming through the door. And then after Gareth's experience, he really started to enjoy the producing side of things. And as soon as that happened, that meant that we could be a true team with any project that we were working on. And so for about 3 years, we looked for scripts for me to direct. And I couldn't find anything, effectively being a sort of a bottom feeder, not getting the big things that are coming through. And sent an email to a joint friend of ours, and said, you know, do you have any unmade plays that we could make into a TV show? We were getting sent bundles and bundles and bundles, and then in one, just like one line saying, you might like this, the King's Speech, it's the Queen's 80th birthday. And for the first time, it was a script literally 2-3 pages in. It's amazing. And I phoned Gareth the next day and said, I found my film. And, you know, well, the rest is history, but I mean, you can fill in those gaps.
I mean, it's interesting because everyone focuses on the King's Speech, that, you know, that happens to be an overnight success that was 18 years in its planning. Yeah. You know, both of us had long careers prior to the film. By that point that the King's Speech came to us, I'd actually produced our first feature film, Exam. Yep. Very small film that got a release in the UK and picked up a BAFTA nomination and a Dinard Award and an Independent Spirit Award. But we sort of felt that there was a bit of a, it sounds really wanky, but that there was a calling at play that meant that if we were prepared to put in the time and dedicate a lot of sort of personal and emotional commitment to the company and say, you know what, we're really going to give this a punt. And it was a brave decision. I mean, it basically meant both Simon and I surrendering our freelance careers, which had been our mainstay of employment for all of our adult life up until that point. And yes, we were sort of, you know, fortunate that the King's Speech came to us. But the interesting thing about the film at large is that quite quickly it moved from a small chamber piece that Simon might direct for BBC 3, BBC 4, that was going to cost £500,000 to evolving and having its own life. And we brought in a couple of other producers because we were looking at one point to shoot down in Australia. And then Tom became attached, and it just seemed that at every step with the evolution of the film, it grew in magnitude, and ultimately, you know, I mean, its legacy is phenomenal. I mean, 4 Academy Awards, 7 BAFTAs. I think it's actually garnered in excess of 70 international film awards, and is still currently the highest-grossing British independent film of all time. And And the really fun thing that Ravensbourne liked shouting from the rooftops is they don't do film. It was more sort of TV at the time. Since the King's speech, we've gone on to, and Simon can go into more detail, but I think we've produced getting close to 12 hours of network TV. We've just completed and delivered our latest feature film, Zaytoon, which picked up an Audience Award at Toronto this year, was in London Film Festival and goes on release 26th of December. We have our next film in early pre-production that should go this year, and are looking to 2013 to match the successes of 2012, if not improve on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and also the one thing for us is how do you contain the growth? How do you, as a business, once you actually started, because what effectively went from what was my second bedroom was our office into we've made a feature film that went well. Now we've got this thing that seems to be just gathering like a snowball, just getting bigger and bigger, and that's been it's not been an easy transition, and I don't mean that it's in an aggressive way. That there's been lots of fights, but it's weird when you go from actually we're the masters of our own destiny to actually now looking after other people, and and as owner managers of our company, it's a different skill because we've been so used to working in a freelance cycle that has a beginning, middle, and end. But once you actually set up a company, it's the long game, and it's a really different set of parameters that you have. It's a different set of getting up in the morning. Because one of the things that your guys will get to know when you go and work on a film, TV show, whatever, is that once it's over, you sort of celebrate, or you celebrate and then you get the flu because you've been working so hard. With this, there's a sort of sustainability that you have to bring in, and that's been not tricky, but it's been an interesting journey. We're learning all the time. Questions? Go on then.
Any questions? Can you think of? You have to have a bit of a think. It's too much of a shock to them to suddenly come up with a question.
Or a topic that you particularly would like to hear our thoughts on.
I mean, I want to know exactly. Have you got any highlights, like a moment in your career? Obviously, winning BAFTAs is fantastic, but when you're actually producing, where you just think this has been a great day, this moment was fantastic, put a smile on your face.
I'd been working as the very first job I had was in the machine room at a news company. So you're just doing uplink satellite feeds and all of that, and just pressing buttons, press record and play. That's basically it, with some glorified wires. Sorry to any techies that are out there, but for me it wasn't where my passion was. And I did that for sort of 2-3 years, and I just started doing a little bit of news work, and then someone that believed in me in a company sort of said, "Oh, why don't you look at this idea? It's a guy that's gone missing. I think he went missing a couple of weeks ago." And I think it'd be an interesting idea for a story. And I started to look into it, and it sort of evolved into me then going in and pitching in at Channel 4 for a cutting edge. And they gave me a little bit of development money. And the guy had gone missing. It worked out it was back in 1985. And I was then going to go some 20 years later to see if I could find him. And I got very excited. I'm going to be directing. It's all on me now. And I went, the first thing that I was told going out to Tenerife, I don't know if you places are familiar with it, was just be careful, because you could wind up missing like this guy Ricky. And I was shitting myself, and I spent a week out there, and every person I meet, literally every person said, "You've got to be really careful what you're talking about here." And people recognized him from 20 years ago. No one was really talking. And then I came back, I cut the trailer together, and then we gave it into Channel 4, and they kept delaying the meeting and delaying the meeting and delaying the meeting. And then we had the meeting. Hilary Bell, who was the commissioning editor at the time, sort of came in, sat down, talked through the piece. And I'm not very good at playing poker, so I'm just enthusiastic. I really want to do this. I really want to do this. And I was just thinking, it was just please, 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 please. This is it. This is my moment. And she went, all right. And she never asked me, and I'd never been in an edit apart from that little, the little piece that we'd done. I'd never edited a program before in my life. And suddenly I'm making network TV, 9 o'clock, prime time. And I remember walking out and just going, that's it. I've arrived. Every moment that I've had, every little dream that has been about that one moment. And it's very addictive. Believe me, it never goes. It never goes.
And Gareth, you?
There's one night that sticks out in my mind.
Night?
No, I mean, getting an Oscar from Steven Spielberg with your best mate stood next to you and your wife going nuts on the seats at the back of the Kodak Theatre. I think, I mean, those are the big fun events. I think it wasn't the glamour around that event that meant so much to me. It was actually, my dad was out in LA with us, and he, God, I tell this teary story every time that I'm with a bunch of students, but I remember 3 years after I left Ravensbourne and I thought I was the mutt's nuts and that I should be obviously a commissioning editor by now or directing feature films, and just went through this period of sort of self-doubt where the calls weren't coming in, the jobs weren't easy. I was living in London, which, as I know you guys know, is not a cheap part of the world to be in. And by this point, other friends were working for double glazing salesmen and making proper money. And I went down to visit my dad, and I was really close to throwing in the towel. I just thought, you know what, I can't deal with this rejection and the stress and being skint and da-da-da-da-da. And he just sat me down, bought me a pint and said, don't you dare give up. Because he knew how hard I'd worked at Ravensbourne. And he knew the effort that I had to put in to not just tread water at Ravensbourne, but to excel. And having gone through that hardship and difficulty, why should I throw the towel in? And he was the first person I saw as I walked off the stage at the Oscars, and he remembered that night, which was 11 years ago. Cheeky bastard said I had to pay him back for the pint at the time, but that was a good one.
And what about when you're actually producing? So you're there, you're on set, working with the fabulous actors. What's that like?
Well, everyone gets caught up in the glitz and the glamour, and one of the questions when we were going on the campaign with the King's Speech is, you must have known, you must have been so prescient of thinking that you knew you were on your long march to a big film. Well, the truth of it is practical producing is not that. It's having arguments with electricians that think that they're in their second hour of overtime. It's having a tearful actress that doesn't want to work that day because she's been slammed in the press that morning. It's having financiers screaming at you because they didn't understand that they put the money in now and they don't see it come out for 3 years' time. So I think there's the sort of the day-to-day practical producing that is about getting in the trenches and rolling up your sleeves and going to work. And that work ethic that this place instilled in both of us, I think, really helped shape our careers. Events like Rave on Air, events like tonight. Tonight there's probably, a crew of 20 people that are involved in some way of making sure that this part of the show goes off well. And learning the team skills, the communication skills, managing ego. There's someone up there with their hand on a vision mixer or a sound. What do you call? I never did sound very well. The bit that go up and down and cuts me off. So everyone has an important part to play, is what I'm trying to say. And one of the benefits of Ravensbourne is having the opportunity to work within a team to actually make stuff rather than it just being a theoretical exercise.
Do you still see any of your other Ravensbourne mates? I mean, it's all about networking and what they're all up to. Or...
We meet in caves in Chislehurst, sort of bare-chested, where there's dead chickens on the floor. We try and keep in touch. I mean, funnily enough, in recent times, lots of people have got in touch with us, including most of the faculty here that keep on dragging us back for another event. But no, we try to. There's definitely a sense of there is an alumni from Ravensbourne, and I think, those graduating years, you do tend to keep connected, and I think 3 or 4 we're very close with.
I mean, I think it's one of those things that's straight out of the blocks. There's some people you don't want to see again, not in a nasty way, but you've sort of had enough with because you've been living in their pockets for a time, and then there's a group of core mates, and it's like secondary school. You just want to stay with them because they're good friends, as well as they're a good person to sort of like talk through your dreams and your aspirations, but. It's not work, it is a lifestyle. And it's one of those things that you do have to drop everything at a moment and go, you know what, all of that I just had planned, I've got to drop because I've got a job. And they're the friends that you keep, because some people don't quite get it. I think you're being trained to get it. But I think there's one, Roy, who was a sort of fellow director, that we keep in regular contact with, but I don't see really anybody else. But if you do bump into one another, sort of 10, 15 years down the line, it's not so much that you're reminiscing, it's almost like you're just, back into that moment because you know them so well.
I mean, the fun thing, we were joking around at the back just before we came on and, talking about the whispers and the rumours that go round after you graduate and you stay close for the first sort of 3 years and then way to keep up with the gossip, I mean, this was before sort of Facebook and all that, but the only way to keep up with the gossip was to chat to each other, and, you know, you'd hear, oh, did you hear about such and such a tutor's banged up, he's inside, he hit a kid, or, you know, so-and-so's died, and it's like, well, no, I saw him in the pub last night in Soho. But no, there is a definite sort of, you feel that you've gone through a process and that there is a sort of camaraderie that exists amongst the alumni.
Great. I've got a question here, apparently, so I'm just going to pass you over. What's your name? Alex. Okay.
Hi, guys. I'm just wondering, on the practical producing note, what was the dynamic and how was the practicalities of working with Tom Hooper, the dynamic between the producer-director relationship?
Well, I'll start it, Gareth will finish it. Actually, because it's the way that it started, the way that Tom came onto the project, is we'd had the project for about 9 months. Everybody really liked it, and there was a couple of hurdles, it sort of fell over. And then what we decided to do was to put on a reading at the Pleasance Theatre in North London to see what it sounded like, and also to invite a sort of a selected group of people along, possible investors, some commissioners, and also Tom Hooper's mum. And the reason that she was invited, and it was strategic, one, because Tom was on the rise as a director. I actually didn't know who he was at the time, although I found out once I started looking at his CV that I'd been voting for him as a BAFTA member for some time. But his mother's a historian that specialises in that period of British Australian history, and she's Australian, married to an Englishman. So that there was a sort of we actually brought her in, one, to see if we could get closer to Tom, but also to see if there was an authenticity to the piece. And she, you know, famously went out, phoned him up and said, I've just found your next film. The very first meeting that was had with Tom, I wasn't there. I was actually in Cambodia working with Department of Homeland Security hunting paedophiles. And Gareth met him, but it was at that stage and when I did then meet him, I realised, although at that time I was a co-producer, that it was very difficult for me, because being a producer in TV is very different to being a producer in film. I mean, literally poles apart. There's lots of apparently on paper similarities, but just in terms of the scale and the lattice work of pieces that you need to look after, they're really different. So when I then did meet him, and obviously this is a script that had been very close to my heart, I was going to direct it, I realised I had to step away because I was going to behave like a director in the room, and you can't have two directors. And so it was like, you know what, I've got to do that at arm's length. But Gareth had obviously had lots of experience. He'd been doing 15 years in films at that point, whereas I'd been working in docs. So
I think, I mean, the dynamic ebbs and flows daily. You know, I mean, when you look, I mean, if we maybe sort of make it not about Tom and just about sort of dealing with directors per se, you know, one of the things that really helps getting a film financed is above the title names that are recognisable. So, for example, a first-time features director will struggle to raise a budget of more than £1 to £1.5 million because they're a first-timer, and there is an accepted industry practice that puts them in a certain bracket. When you start to work with directors that have had opportunity to start to get 3, 4 films under their belt, have worked on bigger budgets, then the expectations grow. And the role of practical producing in terms of managing the director is trying to find the balance between serving their vision, because ultimately that's why you've hired them, and let's remember, producers hire directors, directors don't get producers' jobs. That you have to find a way of managing that creative vision, keeping them on track, making sure that it's true to the film as you've sold it to other people, because there's nothing worse than taking a film to market and saying, right, I'm going to give you Lawrence of Arabia meets Transformers, and suddenly you turn up with Mary Poppins. You know, so it's keeping that vision to the market, to the script, and most directors that have worked on productions of a scale know what they can ask for. And then they know the 10% that they should be asking for, because it's their job to push, to cajole, to reach, to overreach, to try and make the very best that can be possibly made of what you have in front of you. And more often than not, the producer's role is to just try and manage that expectation, and for it not to lead down to a meltdown on set or suddenly upset actors or anything like that. So your work in terms of motivation of both the team and your key creatives is very important.
Is there anyone else?
But I love Tom Hooper and can't wait to work with him again.
Oh, there you go. What's your name, sorry? Luke, here you go.
Hi. You kind of touched on it there. I just wondered if you could go into sort of more detail of from script to actually shooting, like the difficult days or the days when you started to realise, well, actually this is really going somewhere. Like, if you could just sort of elaborate more on that process, maybe.
Look, I mean, the very first time we got the script, I printed it out. I didn't like to read it as iPads went around at the time, so I mean, it was not that long ago, but it was. I didn't like to read on my laptop.
It was written on slate with chalk.
And I print it out so I can scribble my notes in, and usually hugely disappointed with most of the things that are put in front of me. And I just read it one night, and it was literally 2 or 3 pages in, I thought I had something special. And by 10 pages in, I was just almost too excited to read anymore. And then my wife was asleep next to me. It must have been about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I finished it, and I'm like, I found it. And I wanted to wake her up. And then I sort of then go, the next morning I'm phoning Gareth. I said, I found the piece. But then you're just not sure. I think that's one of the things. Then you have to go out and test it. And I actually, the very first Gareth just sort of said, these are the people you need to go and talk to. So I took it into Film 4, and they literally, shortest meeting I've ever had, and they just went, no, we don't do period. In their defense, it wasn't because of the script. It was because of me, because I was going in as a first-time director. They had an understanding of how much it would cost, probably down to me, and just went, no, we're not interested. It then went quite an unusual route in where it almost became a sort of a TV doc, just because I wanted to do it. And I didn't have the I never knew it, or we never knew it could be something of the scale it became. We just knew we had but it was a play. We then also started to poke it out to people. Someone knows somebody, let's put it out there. But because it was a play, it was one of these things, some people read plays and books to get to screenplays, but a lot of people, when they get to a certain level, don't. They will only read a screenplay, and if you put something else in front of them, they consider it an insult. They'll literally go, if you want me to spend X amount of money on this, have the decency to put it in a format that I'm used to, because otherwise their brain is trying to translate what's on the page, and that's not what they want. They want to be submerged in it. And so we then started sort of conversations with the writer's agent, to come over and then to do that sort of process. I mean, Gareth can pick it up from there in terms of we got it to a certain point, and there was a bit where it almost got through the door, and we thought, that's it, it's ours, and everything fell over. I'd remortgaged the house, done the whole bit on this, and it sort of got to that stage. We thought, that's it, it's finished. 6 months' work, all gone. And then Gareth, you had the foresight to ask some people what we should be doing next.
Yes, I mean, I think trying to unpick what underlines your question is that in terms of preparation for a script, getting it ready to pitch, the one thing I always say at these events and the work that I do at London Screenwriters Festival and other things is that as a producer, the worst thing a writer can do is make the assumption that I have the time or inclination to add my own interpretation or to decode a badly formatted script or get what you see in it. The writer's time is their own, and to take the script as far as that person can possibly get it. You can see it when you get something come through the door. If it feels ill-formed and there's something about, when work has been done on a script, because it's evident in there. It could be simple things like layout and punctuation. It could be more complex things where you suddenly go, well, at the turn of the second act, the protagonists do something that I just don't believe that they would do. It's a leap of faith that isn't there. So the writer hasn't thought it through. So my recommendation or advice at any of these sort of events that I do is that, the writer should take the script as far as they possibly can before they even test the water. And as a producer, when you're receiving scripts, is to be fairly brutal. I mean, I'll be very, very candid. We have a development team at Bedlam now. I don't read anything that hasn't gone through at least 2 other people. And it doesn't matter whether you hit me up on Facebook, poke me on LinkedIn, find me on Skype or whatever, there's a due process. And that due process is that it comes into the company, it's read, it goes up to our head of development, and if it goes from our head of development and comes into my desk, then I might take a look at it. And I think one of the sort of common mistakes when people are pitching ideas in is to not do your homework, not look at a company and see how they do things, and then actually stick to it. I mean, there are always exceptions to the rules, and I feel incredibly hypocritical at these sort of things because, for example, how we got Geoffrey Rush attached to the project. We stuck a first draft of the script through his front door in Sydney. I got a 3-page email from his agent basically saying that I was dead in the industry, he's never going to do it, he hates... It was just all wrong. It was all wrong. And whenever anyone says, how do you approach talent? I say, never, ever do what we do or did, but was successful with. So it's slightly two-faced, really, isn't it?
But it did say, P.S., Geoffrey loves it, we need to talk.
Yeah, yeah. That was after the 3 pages of telling me I was an idiot.
Yeah.
So is there any other advice that you'd give to students who are scriptwriters here, that something that's going to stand out for you that might come in your inbox?
Evidence the fact you've done your homework. And acknowledge the fact that, I mean, this surprises people. If I get a script, it takes me half a day to read it. Now, it's not because I'm thick, but I read every script that gets up to me, I read 3 times. The first one is for story and character. The second one is for production logistics, how much do I think it's going to cost, where do we have to make it, what's the scope and scale. And the third read is, if I'm putting this into the hand of a buyer from Japan, or I'm putting this into the hand of distributors in Eastern Europe, are they going to get the sales aspect of what we need to do to put it together? So be compassionate to the fact that it's going to take me half a day of my life to read that thing. So I don't need to read a full script. If you're trying to send samples of your writing, a couple of scenes is enough. If you're trying to gauge interest on a project, a well-thought-out log line of 25 words and a 1-page treatment is enough. A lot of the TV stuff that we get sent, we're happy to make a decision on a single page, and sometimes we'll ask for more, but I mean, maybe you can sort of talk about how we develop the sort of TV factual stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it gets one of those things that if we are pitching into commissioners, once you've got a good relationship with them, all they want is a line, because they don't have time. And if the line excites them, then they'll go slightly deeper. And I think if anyone's out there writing a script, if you can't tell the story quickly to somebody else that they get it, you're not telling the right story. In general, there'll always be an exception, but really, if you can't get that essence that you believe in every time you tell it, it's wrong. You need to do your homework on it, and I think it's the simple things first. Even though, I mean, there's an old adage. Some guy wrote a 26-page letter to a friend, and he said, "Sorry, I didn't have more time to write a shorter letter." And that's what it's about. If you can condense it down, you can break the back of that, then you're onto something.
Is there any more questions? Yeah. Okay. Great. What's your name, sorry?
Hi. Earlier you were talking about remortgaging your house. How did you get about financing your latest movie?
How did we go about financing?
The King's Speech.
That wasn't. I mean, basically, what had happened is we'd spent some time working on it, and it didn't go anywhere. And we'd spent a lot of time. It was legal. We were getting close to certain things, just spending money. And I think personally realised once you start dealing with lawyers, it's almost like know the deal before you go in, because if they do it on your behalf, they're just getting paid to. I'm not saying they deliberately drag their feet, but as long as it takes, they just get paid, and that cost us a lot of money. And it was at that stage where we then weren't sure if it was good enough, and it was I just turned around. I said to my wife, I just don't know, and she said, well, if you had to bet your house on it, would you? And I said, yeah. We need X amount to just get it through. It literally was, and we're talking, $5,000. I'm not talking I need 100,000, but it was I had nowhere else to go. But just to get us over that next stage. But in terms of the actual financing of it, that was a much more complex.
I mean, basically how the finance came together was Momentum were in first. They came in for the UK territory. Australia then fell to Transmission. We then had 2 competing bids, one from the Weinstein Company, one from Fox. And we progressed both of those deals in tandem, and then our sort of key person within Fox actually got promoted up and away to television. So we lost our sort of champion within Fox, and Harvey was hanging around like a bad smell. Kept on telling us that he wanted the film. At the time, he was bankrupt, and we couldn't find a bank to actually sort of cover his MG. Eventually, we fixed that piece to the puzzle, so we had UK, North America, Australia sold. The UK tax credit was worth about 8% of budget, and we brought in a gap financier, Prescience, who sort of closed the last piece. And also, sorry, I keep on forgetting, the UK Film Council came in at £1 million, so that was one of the final pieces.
Big numbers, obviously. And what about rewinding it back to the films that you've done before, like financing those, like earlier on?
Oh, well, for me, my career has been TV. You know, I wanted to direct, and before going into to go to my features, I wanted to understand what it was like just in the real world. And TV is very different, especially when I started, because what would happen is you go to a channel, they say they like the idea, and they pay for all of it. Now, in the sort of the 15 years that I've been doing this, 17 years I've been doing it, that's changed. Now TV is actually looking a little bit more like film, and that it's becoming a sort of a little bit from here, a little bit from there. But the one thing about TV tends to be when they say yes, it means yes. You know, and as long as there isn't, you know, a Hurricane Sandy or a commissioner leaves, that project will happen. I've spent many a night, you know, consoling Gareth throughout the sort of 15 years where you get so far and it's closing finance, and it's been a nightmare. We literally be in production. No, we're not. That's it. Coming home now.
Yeah. I mean, during my career, I've been on 3 films where we've been abroad and you're packing to come home, and then suddenly there's another little flush of cash that arrives from one of the investors, or something happens. I mean, I think in terms of film finance, you know, you'd need half a day to really get into the nuts and bolts. But I think, you know, there's traditional, and traditional is based on pre-sales of about 40 to 50% of budget, tax credit, whether that's through the UK or another member country, some private equity, whether that's debt equity or true equity, and normally a gap position of sort of 10 to 15%. That's the sort of historical way of putting films together. These days, it's very, very different. I mean, the models of independent film finance, TV financing on the bigger shows is really, really fluid at the moment. I mean, we look at stuff that people have made documentaries that they've brought into us to help promote as a sale that they've completely crowdfunded. You know, that they've raised £250,000 just through an internet campaign or Kickstarter or one of those organisations. The 2 things I always say about when you're financing is, one, you have to do a sensible appraisal of what its market value is, whether its market value be a TV licence or whether it be what territories will pay for that, and then halve it. Because nearly everyone within the financial world with film finance will take a view of sales figures and will work to half of that true value, because everyone wants that little sort of bit of wiggle room or coverage. I
mean, I had some advice from a producer that works very closely with us, and especially about the British film industry, is what he's saying, as producers, you get paid to make the film. That's where you make your money. And then the sort of like when you see all these, you know, the profit share at the back end doesn't tend to exist. It's really, films have to go completely gangbusters and through the roof for a producer to ever see any of that. So it's about building in any of your profit into that part of the game.
Brilliant. There's another question, right? Okay, Egan.
My question is a bit general. I just want to hear your opinion about how this film industry might change in the future in terms of technical aspects and the ways of storytelling, because these days 3D is coming out. I mean, a lot of 3Ds, even like at home, you can watch in 3D, technical aspects like that. And also in the future, in terms of storytelling, like, because film and everything, design, art, is all about communicating and the ways of planting the idea to other people. Like, what do you think?
I mean, personally, it was one of the things that we were quite proud of within the company, is that really it all starts with story. That's it. If it isn't a good story, nothing will hide that. And you could show the story in a myriad of different ways, and that could be reality TV, scripted reality, you know, fact-hen, sort of docudrama, documentary, or full-blown feature film. I think when you then look at sort of like technical aspects, I mean, Gareth and I went to see our first sort of like big 3D, you know, IMAX, let's look at the space station, and walked out. It's amazing, it's brilliant. But ultimately, it's still story. You know, and if it's not a good story, once you've got over the sort of like how whiz-bang it all is, it doesn't matter. I mean, there was Keanu Reeves did a documentary recently. I think, is it called Side by Side? I don't know if anyone who's seen it. If you haven't, check it out. But it's about the transition from film to digital. And you got I think they used Christopher Nolan as the person to say that film is the only way to do it. And I think he's been a little bloody-minded in that. You know, it sort of works for the doc, because everyone is saying it doesn't really matter. You know, if you haven't got the story right, you can't hide. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my Transformers, and I'll sit there and I'm actually quite happy when it isn't much. It feels more of a ride, that, you know, if you're going in to see a popcorn movie, it doesn't really matter. You don't mind about the inconsistencies. But if you haven't got the story, it doesn't matter how you're doing it.
I think, for me, the big sea change with looking at technological advances is accessibility. And, you know, without sounding like an old fart, Simon mentioned formats that we were working with, and even we were cutting edge 20 years ago, but the digital evolution has afforded people accessibility to filmmaking. And by filmmaking, that can range from you having an idea, getting a group of mates together with a DSLR, going and shooting it and cutting it yourself. You know, that access is one of the things that I think is a really brave new dawn that we face with these digital improvements. In terms of, you know, the scope of the theatrical side of things going forward, you know, I think, you know, consensus is split between whether 3D is here to stay or a passing fad. I think, you know, the fact that we continue to look at, you know, higher frame rates. I mean, there's people that are shooting at, you know, will never touch shooting at 24 or 30 frames per second anymore because they don't feel it's as crisp as 60. You know, it seems every week that goes by, there's a new camera on the market that's got more memory, a bigger chip, and more whiz, bang, and all the rest of it. But ultimately, it does. It comes down to the craft of storytelling and whether the medium you choose to tell that is a short film that you produce yourself, or whether it is Transformers or Little People with Big Feet, as we're all going to be getting used to in a week's time. It's sort of, it doesn't matter. Having made a 3D movie, though, the sooner we see the back of that, I'm more than happy. It's an incredibly expensive way of telling stories.
Any other questions? Okay, of course.
Hi, I was just wanting to ask how you were talking about Geoffrey Rush and how you posted a script through his door. How else did you get the other actors? Was he the first actor that you got in and the others sort of came in after that?
I mean, Geoffrey was first in. Director attachment came next, so once we had Tom in, he had a certain amount of pull. We worked with a very, very good casting director called Nina Gold, who does a lot of the sort of the top-end period drama. And it's weird, you sort of get a point where there is an industry buzz about a project, and that has this sort of magnetic effect on the cast you're talking to, you know, the key creative talent like DOPs and costume and makeup and stuff. So, but having Geoffrey in at the outset, I think, just gave validity to what we were trying to do. You know, we were two oiks trying to put together this sort of period film at a time that no one wanted to do period, and it's a story about a guy that stutters for 95 minutes. But having Geoffrey attached meant that it had that sort of stamp of approval.
And Colin, of course.
No, Colin came later.
Okay.
Colin was an interesting one, actually. I mean, going back to our friend that was talking about financing, you know, you have these sort of high-brow discussions, and, you know, we were in a meeting with our gap financier saying that we hadn't yet cast Bertie, and we thought the finance was going to fall down, it was all going to go away, and he literally had the checkbook out, and he said, "Oh, I heard Colin Firth doing it. I'll cut the check," I mean, figuratively speaking rather than actually. So we got told we should use Colin by someone that was putting a load of money up.
Brilliant. So how does that process work? Do you just phone them up and go, "Hi, come and do our film"? Can you stutter? That kind of a thing. I mean, what was it like working with them both?
Brilliant. I mean, they're genuine fun. I mean, Colin has the most accurate moral compass I think I know of anyone. You know, he is, sad to say, a really, really nice guy. The two of them are quite fun together. I mean, they're great raconteurs. They've got amazing stories. I remember one of the first weekends that my now wife, we were dating at the time, and I was shooting a film in Poland, and we came back, and I said, look, I've just got to go and meet a couple of the actors for a quick pint after we wrap, because I haven't seen them for a week. So Rosie was sat between Colin Firth and Geoffrey Rush having this beer in Cambridge, and it was just the most absurd thing to see. But they were both really, really lovely and very engaging.
It's a very cool date to take you.
Yeah, I won brownie points that night.
Right, are there any more questions we're going to, just before we... Okay. What we're going to do is, it's coming to the end of the evening now, sadly. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here at Ravensbourne today, and we're very proud of you. So we would like to give you and our own little award from our product design students designed this to say congratulations. Thank you. And thank you very much for coming along this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And the awards still keep coming.